What a great week last Sunday as the AG family was with us here for homecoming. And boy, I think many of you were here for that. And it's always, those family harmonies, they're always really, 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 really awesome. You know, there is something that I've noticed during this pandemic. With all the time that we have at home and often by ourselves, with so many of those normal things of life not available to us, it seems to me that many people are discovering what is really important in life. I confess to you that I've discovered that I don't need sports as much as I thought I did. Used to spend my share of time watching live sports. Nothing wrong with watching live sports, but here's the two things that I've noticed. First of all, I've realized how much time I spent watching live sports. Perhaps more importantly, without it, I realized I didn't miss it that much. I know some of you missed it a whole lot. You're back. But I realized for me that I didn't. Seems like many people have discovered that they don't need to go out as much as they thought they did. That sticking around the house with the family has been really kind of nice. Sadly, I'm afraid many people may be discovering that they're doing just fine without church. Sherry and I were in a conversation last night, and Sherry was telling me about some recent research from the Barna Group, which is a highly reputable organization that does research into a lot of Christian items of Christian interest in the church. Kind of leave it at that. But the most recent estimates from the Barna Group, that's what Sherry was telling me last night, indicate that the church has lost about 30% of its participation. And of course, like you might be reacting right now, my initial reaction was, well, a lot of people are staying home watching on Facebook. And no, this actually took into consideration people who were staying home and watching on Facebook, but now have even dropped off from that. So at first, staying home watching on Facebook was sort of a nice substitute. Didn't have to get up. You could go to church in your jammies. But as time has gone on, we're now something like 7 months, that many of those people are no longer even watching on Facebook. And so the latest estimates, about 30% of people are no longer participating in church. The bottom line is, all in all, people are discovering and making decisions about what's important to them in life. And some of those decisions probably are, we might consider all in all, that they're good decisions. Some of us might sort of figure out they might not be the best decisions. But I do think that all of us need to do that from time to time. And certainly the pandemic has given us an unpleasant reason to do that. But I think that it's a worthwhile exercise if we can slow down long enough, which the pandemic has caused us to do, and have a fewer distractions than normal, again, as the pandemic has caused us to do. It gives us that opportunity to think about what is really important in life. There was a really smart Jewish guy who lived about 1,000 years before Christ. He spoke to an assembly. This was something that they did in that culture from time to time. They would gather the people together and they would speak to that assembly. And really, in a way, not much different than this, except I think probably the assembly was a lot larger that King Solomon spoke to. But gathering all the people of Jerusalem. And he spoke to them, and he declared what I believe is a profound truth that to this very day needs to be heard and observed. My goodness, is Pastor Rich saying that about a book from the Old Testament? Why, yes. Yes, I am. It's a message that is often criticized as being negative. I mean, look, if you start off vanity, vanity, all is vanity, sounds pretty negative, right? But if you'll stick with me this morning and really over the next few weeks, if you'll stick with me, I think you'll see that in reality, this message that Solomon spoke, which we now have in our Old Testament as the book of Ecclesiastes, is not only a very positive message, not only a very profound message, but a message that is 100% on point, anything but negative. The words of King Solomon. He begins the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun? I want us to begin with this very fundamental point about Solomon's circumstances and his situation, and what we're going to see is his search for real meaning in life. And that first point where I want us to even begin this morning is he tried everything. He tried everything. Chapter 1 in its entirety of the book of Ecclesiastes is a very honest appraisal of human life under the sun. That's an interesting phrase, under the sun. That phrase, we find it 29 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. And I want us to just kind of underscore that phrase, under the sun, because that's where the vanity of vanities lies. Under the sun makes reference to this life. Think about yourself 1,000 years or almost 1,000 years before Christ. There were still some flat earthers around back then. But the perspective of people, here we are standing on the earth, the sun is up there, heaven is beyond the sun, somewhere way up there. Down here, life on earth is under the sun. And so when we hear his word of all is vanity under the sun, this human life, what he is describing is the whole of human experience. Think of it this way. All the wisdom of man. We as humans, we think we're so smart, right? And Solomon reminds us, vanity. All the wisdom of man in contrast with the wisdom of God and the ways of God. Under the sun as opposed to beyond the sun. In man's search for meaning, I might even say it this way, in man's seemingly never-ending search for happiness, what Solomon tells us is that nothing under the sun satisfies. Nothing. Let me interject here that that's why many times this book of the Bible is perceived as negative. Because if that's all you say is that nothing satisfies, that's negative. But that's not the whole story that Solomon gives us. Solomon, right here in this first chapter, indicates that he himself has been on that search. So this is not a case, as we read the book of Ecclesiastes, of Solomon, the preacher, standing up before the assembly and waving his finger and saying, nothing for you under the sun satisfies, it's all vanity. The same as me standing here today, I also am not saying for you, nothing for you under the sun brings satisfaction. What Solomon is saying is he himself tried it. I'm no Solomon, but I can tell you, I tried a bunch of it too. And probably most of us here have tried the different things that we think are going to bring us happiness. He indicates that he himself had been on that search and he found nothing. And in the next few chapters, he will get into some of the specifics of that search. And we will, over the next few weeks, look at some of those specific things. But today, as we look at chapter 1, essentially what he is saying is it's like everything that we try, that we seek for happiness and meaning in, ends up in vanity. He begins with a place that I think might be really appropriate, even for us to consider. He begins with the idea of work and labor. Verse 3, what profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun? Let me be very clear, as someone who, for all my life, I've been one of those people, I work hard. I have 2 jobs right now, right? And so I'm not going to stand up here and try to convince you that work is bad, it's an awful thing. In fact, work is not bad. We ought to work. We are instructed to work. But it is not the source of ultimate happiness. And that's where we get in trouble with work, is when we try to find our meaning in work. That's what Solomon said that he did. And again, many of us, I think, we try to find our meaning in work. And we find that it leaves us unsatisfied. Some people hate work. You know, I'm talking about this today, and the minute I say you're not going to find happiness in work, somebody's wanting to go, yeah! Some people hate work. Some people love work. But work will never provide that lasting fulfillment and joy that we all seek after. You know, this goes back to the curse, all the way back to the Garden of Eden. When Adam and Eve sinned, well, let me go back a step further. God created mankind to have relationship with him. And as we know, Adam and Eve sinned in the garden. That's what we refer to as the fall. And it separated mankind from God. And right at the beginning, there was a curse on Adam and Eve. And ladies, you remember the curse on Eve. Would this be a good place to mention that my daughter Shauna, the one who has 12 kids, will once again experience the curse of Eve in May? Come on, you guys. That's supposed to be great news, right? Got that text. Number 13 is on the way. Okay, so, but that was the curse on the woman. But do you remember the curse on the man? Back in Genesis chapter 3. And I just want to, real quickly, just kind of read this because it's... because it says it better than I can try to quote it. Chapter 3 of Genesis, beginning with verse 17. Adam To Adam, God said, because you have heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it. Now watch the curse on the man. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it. Bart, that's why we have to dig weeds 4 million times to try to get anything out of the garden. All the days of your life, both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. You shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. That does not sound like something pleasant. When God created Adam and put him in the garden to take care of the garden, it was a wonderful, fulfilling, joyous thing. Relationship with God, take care of the garden. At the fall, work became associated with that curse. It lost its fulfillment. Even for those of us who enjoy work, we err if we look to work to be our source of ultimate fulfillment and joy. Solomon addresses that back in chapter 1. In verse 4, he says, one generation passes away, another generation comes. We spend our whole lives working our heads off, wanting to, quote, make a difference in the world. And again, there is nothing at all wrong with that. But when we get to that age of retirement or ending our work, then what? The young whippersnappers come along and take over our work. Someone else does it. They might do it totally differently than we did it. They may dislike the way that, they may undo everything that we did. And when that generation grows old and gets to the age of retirement, here comes another generation. And they may undo everything. The futility, the vanity of putting all of our hopes and dreams and fulfillment in work, that just like that can be undone. He tried everything. Let me say something else about Solomon. Not only did he try everything, he succeeded at most things. I mean, look, chapter 1, I want to skip down to verse 12. Chapter 1, verse 12. This is Solomon, I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. And I set my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven. This grievous task God has given to the sons of man, by which they may be exercised. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and indeed all is vanity and grasping for the wind. Down at verse 16, I communed with my heart, saying, look, I have attained greatness and have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge. This is King Solomon, one of the smartest men ever, and rich, incredibly wealthy, and successful. He was, after all, the king. It's not like he was a miserable, bitter failure when he's on this search for meaning and coming up empty. He was not only the king, but he was the king of Israel during a great time and a fairly rare time of peace. One would say you could have looked at him and thought, my goodness, he's not only a king, he's a great king. He's a successful king. The problem is he was not a miserable failure, he was a miserable success. Even all of that success did not satisfy. Being king during peaceful times did not satisfy. Being wealthy did not satisfy. We know this because he was so miserable that the book of 1 Kings lets us know that Solomon Spent a lot of time finding wives that also didn't make him very happy. But he ended up following his wives into idolatry, searching for meaning, satisfaction, and happiness. That he forsook the God of Abraham and went into idolatry. And ultimately, that actually led to the division of Israel into two kingdoms. You're familiar with the story of how Israel was a divided kingdom for a long time. It was Solomon, supposedly one of the wisest people ever. But this search for happiness had grave consequences for the king and for his level of success as the king. Because his search for happiness took him away from God into things that were apart and opposed to God. And as a result, the kingdom divided. And so he did end up being a failure as a king in the end. So as I mentioned a little while ago, the next chapters go into some detail about this searching, and we will look at that over the next couple of weeks. But I don't want to end here today and leave you in suspense. If I stopped here today and this was the only message you heard, you would think, well, Pastor Rich, that is a really negative message. That is a really negative book in the Bible. And actually, no, it's not a negative book in the Bible. Because what we do find out, we discover that Solomon did discover the one thing. He discovered the one thing. The title of the message this morning, All is Vanity Except. There is one thing and only one thing that brings us that ultimate fulfillment and that ultimate happiness. And so rather than make you wait, I'm going to go to the end of the book. I'm going to go to the end of the book of Isaiah. The end of the book of Ecclesiastes. Chapter 12. And I want to read the last two verses. I could get Sherry to stand up and quote them because she knows them by heart. Because she gave them to us last night, didn't she, Samantha? Okay, here are the final two verses of this message that he proclaimed to the assembly. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether it is good or whether it is evil. He went down every road. He explored everything that there could possibly have been to explore. Unlike us, he had enough money that he could even afford to try things that you and I might not be able to afford. And even they did not bring satisfaction. Even they were futile. Even they were vanity. But he discovered the one thing, the only thing. How is that so? How is it that the one thing, and there is only one thing, how is it that there's only one thing that can satisfy us? The answer is hard for us sometimes, but it's pretty easy, and it's right in front of us. In fact, the preacher, Solomon, told us the answer. We read it this morning. Chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes. I love chapter 3, by the way. Little side note. Arlo Guthrie. Song made really popular by the Byrds. To everything, turn, turn, turn. That's Ecclesiastes chapter 3. But I want to look at verses 9 through 11. What profit has the worker from that in which he labors? I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts. In verse 10, I have seen the God-given task. Verse 11, he has put eternity in their hearts. God made us that way. He made us, first of all, to long for satisfaction and happiness and fulfillment and joy. But more importantly, He made us in such a way, eternity in our hearts. He made us in such a way that only that which is eternal will fill the void. Only that which is eternal will fill the void. Everything else that we try, will not bring us that lasting fulfillment and satisfaction and joy. Only a right relationship with God will fill that void. Remember, man's sin broke that relationship with God. And about 1,000 years after Solomon spoke these words, Jesus, the Messiah, gave his life as a sacrifice that paid the penalty for our sin so that our relationship could be restored. Our part is to choose it and receive it by faith. Everything under the sun is vanity, except that. Let's pray. Lord, I pray today that we would not look at this classic, amazing book from the Old Testament and think, oh, it's negative, it has nothing to say for me or for us. It has the one thing, the secret that we all need to know happiness and fulfillment and eternity. It points us right back to you. It's amazing, Lord, how that when our relationship with you is right, that all the other things under the sun seem to be more fulfilling. When we're not chasing them for ultimate satisfaction and ultimate happiness, that's when they seem to fit better. Lord, I pray that each one of us would do an inventory, as many of us have during this pandemic. What's really important in our lives? Is it all the things that we now might see could be just distractions? Are those things really the things that are most important to us? Or is it that relationship with you that maybe, just maybe, we ought to give more time, attention, and focus to? I pray that the Holy Spirit, as we make and take inventory, I pray the Holy Spirit would speak to our hearts and reveal to us if there are things under the sun that we have given the place that only you deserve. And then I pray we'd be willing to make those